Imagine a story that begins with death, but instead of ending there, gives birth to an eternal promise. Imagine a man who lived at the height of human glory, governor of Egypt, surrounded by honor, power, and recognition, but who, at death, left an order that would last for centuries. "Do not leave my bones here, take me with you." Why? What did Joseph know that others didn't? What was so powerful in that final wish that made the people of Israel carry his bones for generations across the desert, through enemies, holding on to the promise, just to bury him elsewhere? This isn't just a historical account. It's a spiritual mystery that speaks to our soul. Because maybe what Joseph wanted to teach us wasn't about geography. Maybe it was about an eternal destination, a lesson hidden in the details most overlook, and one that can transform how you view death, promise, and faith. In this video, you will understand why Joseph's body became a prophetic symbol of something far greater than himself. You will discover how the death of a man revealed God's faithfulness and the power of a faith that transcends time. So take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear might change the way you live today. And if this journey has already touched your heart so far, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep spreading light and wisdom. Let's begin. Joseph lived surrounded by wealth, power, and influence. But deep down, he knew he didn't belong there. He wasn't from Egypt. He was born in a tent among shepherds, son of Jacob, grandson of Isaac, great-grandson of Abraham. The lineage of the promise ran through his veins. And even after years of ruling a foreign land, his heart remained focused on God's promise. When the days of his life were complete, 110 years, Joseph did not die alone, nor in bitterness. The Bible shows us that he passed, gathered with his family, surrounded by his brothers, the sons of Israel. He was able to see his great-grandchildren in his arms, something rare for his time. He had time to bless generations, to say farewell, and to affirm with conviction, "God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Genesis 50:24. After that, with dignity and faith, Joseph gave up his spirit. He was temporarily buried in Egypt. His body was embalmed according to Egyptian customs, a sign of honor. But he was not placed in the royal tombs, because Joseph knew, "This is not my final resting place." He left clear instructions, not as a demand, but as an act of faith. "When God comes to your aid, take my bones with you." He could have been buried with honors among the pharaohs, but he refused. He chose to be taken with his people, even if that only happened centuries later. He chose to wait in death for the fulfillment of the promise, rather than rest in comfort among those who did not share his faith. That choice changes everything, because it shows that even in death, Joseph remained faithful. Faithful to a land he never saw, but believed in. Faithful to a God who never forgets his covenants. The Bible makes this clear. He died believing, and that's what placed him in the Hall of Faith heroes, not for what he achieved, but for what he waited for until the end. Egypt did not bind him. Not even death silenced him, even embalmed. Joseph kept pointing toward the promised land, toward God. And even after dying, he continued saying, "I don't belong here." It wasn't just a sentimental request. It wasn't a personal wish. It was a prophecy. Joseph didn't say, "If God comes to visit you," he said, "When God comes." He had no doubt. He wasn't hoping, maybe. He knew. And there, before his brothers and before death, he didn't ask for gold or tributes or statues. He asked that his bones be taken with the people when God came to free them. It was as if he was saying, "Even in death I will go with you. Even if my eyes don't see it, my faith walks alongside you. Even in silence, I will continue pointing to the promise." That request was not common. No one plans what will be done with their bones centuries later. But Joseph lived with his eyes on the invisible. He believed that God never fails, and that every word given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be fulfilled, including the promise of a land. The Bible highlights this as an act of faith, not his revealing dreams, not his rise to power, but this request, this detail. Hebrews 11 says, "By faith Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones." Simple, silent, but full of conviction. That's how true faith moves. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand signs. It acts before the promise is fulfilled, as if it already were. Joseph died believing in what hadn't happened yet, and left a sacred reminder to the next generations: God will come. He always does. His request became a legacy. It became a seed of hope, a marker between the not yet and the it's coming. When everything felt dark, Joseph's bones shone, as if saying, it's not over. There's more. Wait for him. 400 years. That's far too long for any promise to still feel real. It's enough time for dozens of generations to be born and die without ever seeing with their eyes, but holding something in their hands, a hope wrapped in silence. The bones of Joseph were not forgotten. They were protected. They were more than mortal remains. They were a living memory that God had not abandoned his people during centuries of slavery, while the chains tightened and the whips tore the flesh. The bones were there, as if saying, remember, he will come. You don't belong to Egypt. There is a promised land waiting for you. With every new child born, someone would tell the story. These are Joseph's bones. He believed, and we believe too. Time passed. The Pharaoh who knew Joseph died. Then others came who forgot him. But the people remained firm because they had faith. And they had a reminder until the day came. The cry of the people rose, and God heard. He called Moses, and the deliverance began. And in the chaos of departure, while families rushed, grabbing children, food, clothes, Moses did not forget. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. Exodus 13:19. They could leave behind gold, they could leave behind food, they could leave homes, but they could not leave behind the one who believed before them all. The bones of Joseph journeyed with the people. They passed through the Red Sea. They crossed the desert. They heard the 10 Commandments at Sinai. They were carried by the cloud and by the fire. They were there when manna fell, when water gushed from the rock, when the people complained, when the people rejoiced, as if Joseph, even in death, was part of it all, as if his silent, steady faith continued sustaining God's promises throughout the journey. And when someone grew weary, when it seemed they would never arrive, all they had to do was look at the bones and remember, he believed, and so can we. Because a faith that begins in one man can cross centuries and ignite an entire nation. After so many years wandering through the desert, they finally crossed the Jordan. The promised land lay before them, and with it, one last mission. Joseph's bones were still there, preserved, carried, honored. They had crossed everything together. Now, it was time to return home. The destination was not random. They didn't bury Joseph just anywhere. They brought his bones to Shechem. Shechem was special. It was the first place where God promised the land to Abraham. It was there that Jacob, Joseph's father, dug a well and bought a piece of land, and that very land was the one he gave to Joseph. It was his by right, and now it would be his for eternity. The book of Joshua says, and Joseph's bones, which the children of Israel brought up out of Egypt, they buried in Shechem, in the plot of land that Jacob bought. None of this was coincidence. Everything was aligned with divine precision. Joseph, who had been sold by his brothers, was now honored by his descendants, not with celebration, but with faithfulness. He returned to the soil that carried the promises of his God, and there he was buried, not as someone forgotten, but as a fulfilled testimony. Every handful of earth thrown over his bones said, "You believed, and you were right. You waited, and the promise came. You dreamed, and now we see it with our own eyes." Shechem became an altar, not of stones, but of memory, of faith, of gratitude, and the sons of the sons of the sons could walk through that land and say, "He rests here because he never doubted that God would come." When the promise is finally fulfilled, past and future embrace, and the faith that once was hope becomes testimony. Joseph's request was not just about geography, it was about identity, it was about faith, it was about where his heart truly belonged. Egypt represented glory, status, comfort. But it also symbolized slavery, paganism, forgetfulness. The land where he was exalted was not the land where he wanted to rest. Joseph refused a tomb of honor in the most powerful empire of the time, to wait centuries to be buried in the land of the promise. That says a lot, because deep down his request is a cry of spiritual separation. I lived here, but I'm not from here. My inheritance lies elsewhere. I don't want my body to rest where my soul never felt at home. Naidu, how many of us are so immersed in the Egypt around us, in achievements, systems, appearances, that we forget where the true homeland of the soul is? Joseph didn't get lost in any of it. He remained faithful to the purpose, even when he had every reason to drift away. And his death sealed that faithfulness. Egypt represented the now, Canaan represented the eternal, and Joseph chose to rest in eternity, even if the present seemed more comfortable. That is mature faith. Faith that sees beyond what can be touched. Faith that says no to what shines, to say yes to what endures. And more, Joseph's request became a legacy, a constant reminder that we are pilgrims, that our final home is not here, that God's promises are worth more than any earthly achievement. Those bones spoke louder than 1,000 sermons. They said, "Don't get comfortable. Don't make Egypt your home. Remember, you have a promise. Keep walking." When we understand this, everything changes. We start making choices based on what is eternal. We let go of what glitters today for what lasts forever. Joseph didn't want to be remembered as an Egyptian hero. He wanted to be remembered as a child of the promise. And even in silence, even in death, he succeeded. His request was not about bones, it was about destiny. It was about faith. It was about eternity. And perhaps, without realizing it, he taught us something that still echoes today. It doesn't matter where you are now. What matters is where your heart rests. In Egypt or in God. He didn't write books. He didn't leave monuments. He didn't have an imposing tomb. But Joseph's legacy echoed for generations. Because when a man lives by a promise, even his bones speak. No voice, no gestures, no presence, but they speak, and they speak loudly. Joseph's bones crossed the desert, but they also crossed the soul of a people. With every step on the journey, they reminded them, "We haven't arrived yet, but we're on our way." He believed, and we believe too. It's powerful to think about. In truth, it's both terrifying and beautiful to know that even after death, someone can continue preaching, continue inspiring, continue guiding hearts toward God. Joseph's faith wasn't just his. It spread. It became collective. He planted a kind of trust that grew in the hearts of an entire people, and that makes us reflect, what are we leaving behind? If everything ended today, What would our bones say? What would our eternal silence speak to the world? Joseph teaches that the strongest legacy is not what we leave to be remembered. It's what we leave so others remember God. He didn't want to be a monument to himself. He wanted to be a reminder of divine faithfulness, and he succeeded. Because even today, thousands of years later, here we are, talking about a man who had enough faith to live as a stranger and to die still waiting. What an example. And the most beautiful part is that Joseph didn't live expecting a reward. He lived to be faithful, that's all. And that was everything. If his bones could carry hope, how much more can our entire lives be used by God if we offer them with the same heart? Joseph's name wasn't confined to the Old Testament. It echoed into the New. And when the author of the book of Hebrews decides to summarize the lives of the giants of faith, there he is, not for interpreting dreams, not for ruling Egypt, but for one single gesture. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Hebrews 11:22. That's the highlight, not the palace, not the accomplishments, but the faith of a man at the brink of death, still expecting what God had promised. This changes how we look at great deeds, because before God, what matters most is not the visible results, but the invisible faithfulness. When everything around him seemed stable, after all, he was a prince in Egypt, Joseph didn't settle. He looked beyond, and his mention in the New Testament confirms that God sees the heart of those who don't sell themselves to the logic of the world. Joseph didn't need to do anything grand in that final moment, but he chose to believe one more time, and that was enough to place him in the gallery of faith heroes. Maybe today you feel like your faith is small, silent, forgotten. But God doesn't measure your faith by the applause it gets. He measures it by the direction it points to. And if your faith points to the promise, it's already great. Joseph was remembered not for what the world would consider great, but because he waited faithfully until his last breath. And that is all God needs to write an eternity. And now, it's about you. Are you living as someone who belongs to this world? Or like someone, just like Joseph, who knows there's something much greater waiting? Maybe you're in the Egypt of your life, surrounded by tasks, goals, status, commitments, but deep down, feeling that you're not from there, that your spirit longs for another land, for another king, for a kingdom that can't be seen but is more real than everything around you. Joseph lived with his eyes on that promise, and even at the end, even surrounded by glories, he said, "Don't leave my bones here. Don't bury me where my soul never found rest." It's a call, a challenge, a loving warning for us today. Where are we placing our feet, and where are we planting our hearts? Living for eternity means making choices now that only make sense in heaven. It's trusting in promises that haven't come true yet. It's carrying in your chest a faith that many don't understand, but that God never ignores. It doesn't matter how far you've gone, nor how used you've become to Egypt. There's still time to realign your path. To say, I also want to be remembered as someone who lived waiting for God. Eternity is right there, and true life begins when you decide to walk toward it. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Let this quiet, steady faith, like Joseph's, bloom within you. Lord God, today I understand that my story doesn't end here. Even if I'm walking through the desert or living in lands I don't recognize as mine, your plan still stands. Help me to live like Joseph, with eyes on the promise, even when everything feels distant. Give me a faith that doesn't give up, a trust that spans generations. May my life be a testimony, even when I fall silent, May my heart remain firm, even as time passes, and may my hope never rest in the comfort of this world, but in the certainty that you will come. Today, I choose to live for eternity. Today, I place my present in your hands. Guide my steps, guard my spirit, and make of me a living promise. Amen. Joseph's story ends with a fulfilled promise, and it begins again every time someone chooses to live with eyes on eternity. If this message spoke to you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who needs to remember that God never forgets what He promised. Leave your like. It helps spread the light. Subscribe to the Inner Light Infinite Wisdom channel, turn on notifications, and walk with us on this spiritual journey. Every new video is made with prayer, purpose, and love to remind you that you are not alone. And now, I ask you one thing. Don't let the faith that awakened in you today fade away. Carry it like Joseph's bones, with reverence, with hope, with direction, because there is a promised land waiting for you too, and God, He will come. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, keep your vibration high and your mind connected to the divine.